Oaken All Cooped Up by Robin K. Wallstrom. Prologue. Sandpaper friends are people that Grandpa says are rough on the outside and can rub you the wrong way. Sandpaper friends are hard to get along with. Grandpa says they cause friction, and that's a fancy word for causes grrr inside you. Grandpa always says that if you endure, in time, sandpaper friends' friction actually helps smooth your surface and makes you softer than you were before. To my surprise, that's the kind of friend I was about to bump into. Unknowingly, I was going to find myself in a real pickle. I wondered if I was the kind of person that could endure. According to the dictionary, endure means to suffer something or someone painful or difficult patiently. Uh-oh. Romans 5:3-5. We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance, and endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because He has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with His love. Chapter 1. Pack me! My name is Oaken. Oak for short. Yep, just like the big, strong oak tree. Nature has taken root in me. I love nature, especially trees. The pine tree at the end of my alley is my favorite. It's big, strong, and I play underneath it with my best friend Jem nearly every day. Dad says the tree reminds him of me, so I believe it's a girl. It's difficult living up to my big, strong name, but I know I'm named on purpose for a purpose. I wanted to be at the tree today, but Mom was taking me to the library instead. The thing about the library is it feels mysterious inside, like people are sneaking around taking cookies from a cookie jar. People are so whispery and shushing. The library's main lobby opened up to more books than I had ever seen. It was quiet, even though there were gobs of people. The only noises I heard were the hidden ones. Those are the noises I usually don't notice, like swishy pants rubbing together, pages turning, sneezes, people's cell phones and jangly keys. This kind of quiet made me nervous. Mom said that people needed quiet to find what they were looking for, which didn't really make sense to me. Whenever I was looking for something, I'd give a real loud shout, and then sometimes someone would shout back, "It's behind the door or under the bed." However, I don't think I'd better experiment with that idea here in the library. Mom suggested I pick out 2 books that interested me. She quickly led me to the nature books in the corner of the beanbag chairs. Wow, books galore. The library had nature books, all right, everything from mice to mountains. How was I gonna choose only 2? I found a book about acorns right away, and another one a little ways down on the 3rd shelf titled Chickens. The chicken on the cover was looking right at me, on its book stand, as if to say, "Pick me," or rather, "Peck me." Ha! So I did. Mom showed me how to scan the barcode to check out my books. I liked that. Although that chicken book, it wouldn't scan. I scanned again in hopes that the computer would say, "Ding." It wouldn't, and the whole time that chicken kept staring at me, as if to say, "Bawk, put those stolen cookies back." Then Mom tried, but no luck for her either. The librarian stood up from behind her desk, mumbling something about sensitive scanners. She manually typed the numbers on the barcode from my chicken book, and ding, it finally scanned. She smiled as she handed it back to me. I asked her if she liked chickens. She winked at me like she knew a secret and nodded enthusiastically. I thanked her and quickly put the book in our bag. I sped away because, well, this place is mysterious, I tell ya. Besides, I felt like I was going to get caught for sneaking cookies I didn't even take. On the way out of the library doors, we bumped into Mrs. Nadergater. She was telling Mom she'd better register me for summer camp. Mrs. Nadergater's daughter, Poppy, had already signed up and camp was filling up fast. Camp Gidgee she called it. Sounded strange. You'd have to agree, singing songs around the campfire with your family is fun, but singing songs with strangers seemed frightening. Soon Mom said goodbye to her, and we headed toward the parking lot toward our car. Camping, sleeping bags, cabin, mosquito repellent entered my ears and stuck there swirling around in my head. We stopped at our car and I asked Mom what mosquito repellent was. She explained that it keeps mosquitoes from bothering people. I believe what Mom meant was that repellent kept mosquitoes from sucking the blood from your skin, injecting their spit into you, which in turn makes us itch. Mosquitoes make a mini dome home of itch on our skin. Grandpa taught me that really smart scientific fact. Even though mosquitoes sucked blood, I didn't want revenge. What I really wanted was friendship with those bugs. But they just wouldn't let me no matter how hard I tried. Rather than slap them dead, I tried to wiggle so they won't land on me. But it's really hard to wiggle your ear tips. Mom, does repellent kill them? I asked. No, I don't believe so. It stops them from landing on you, Mom replied again. I decided to give that repellent a try sometime. Maybe it'd work on my brother Robbie. That'd be what Gramps calls a 2-for-1. Sleeping bags? Now that was a great idea. I liked the thought of sleeping in a bag because, well, that seemed like sleeping in a chrysalis. I told Mom I liked that part about camping. As Mom drove home, she told me about the camping trips we used to take. But I didn't remember that. I didn't remember that at all. From the back seat, I asked Mom if I was going to Camp Gidgee. Mom told me she was going to talk to Dad about it and see what he thought. The problem was, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. So I think I'd like to think about that too. I didn't have the courage to tell Mom that. Mom asked if I remembered playing with Mrs. Nadergater's daughter, Poppy. I nodded yes, but I really didn't want to remember. I remembered Poppy didn't like to play outside. I remembered being at her stuffy house inside all day. Surely all the oxygen had been used up. It felt like I was breathing in old recycled bad breath air. What's worse was Poppy wanted to play with 2 big-headed dolls with long hair. Those heads creeped me out. They didn't have a body, just a head and a neck, and a little bit of shoulders that sat on the table. And the only thing you could do with the dolls was to comb and curl and braid their hair. Poppy liked to put makeup on their faces. Ew. I instantly covered my eyes with my hands. After she put makeup on her doll, she turned it toward my doll, and when I peeked out through the fingers at the doll, I got the shivers. The kind of shivers you can get even when you're not cold at all. Poppy got mad at me because I kept trying to make my big-headed doll walk and talk. Only my doll kept talking about bugs and dirt, and her doll didn't respond. It wasn't fun at her house. Those big-headed hairy thingies were weird and I needed fresh air. I never saw inside-only Poppy Nadergater ever again. That's what I remembered. I knew that Poppy Nadergater was going to be at the camp and suddenly I felt like I needed to roll down the car window. Would Poppy bring those big-headed hairy dolls to camp? Camp was scary enough without a big-headed hairy doll sitting around the campfire singing songs too. I called Jem when I returned home from the library and asked her to meet me at the tree. Good old Jem, now she was fun. Jem loved the tree as much as I did, and I loved being outside. The pine tree grew in Mrs. Grover's yard near the alley. Mrs. Grover, my neighbor and friend, let us play under the tree whenever we wanted. Mrs. Grover was an amazing gardener. I loved her. Once she gave me my very own oak tree. Mom trusted Mrs. Grover and felt safe when I played under the tree. Besides, Mom could see me from the kitchen window. I brought the library books and my key to the tree. I used my key in the pretend keyhole at the fence post that bordered the tree and the alley. My dad gave me the key, and I carried it with me like my big strong name everywhere I went. I waited for Jem and took a deep breath under the tree because it was giving me fresh free oxygen, and that was a gift from God, just like my friend Jem. Chapter 2 Camp Gidgee. I could hear the bell on Jem's bike that we named Violetta. Sure enough, Jem rode up the alley on her purple banana seat bike. She parked Violetta against the fence and ducked under my favorite tree with me. I was reading the books I got at the library. I was learning a lot about acorns. I told Jem an acorn's a tree nut. Jem giggled and said I was a tree nut too. Jem sat down beside me and began reading the other book about chickens. Acorns, like chickens, come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. Jem shared with me what she was learning about chickens. Did you know a hen is a girl chicken? They lay eggs of all different colors. Baby chicks come out of those eggs. I don't know how God comes up with these great ideas. Bet you didn't know those eggs are like cars. It's true. Eggs have two seatbelt straps called chalaza that keep the chick in place as it grows. Ah, thank you, God, for more great thinking. Imagine that. Seatbelts built right inside to protect the baby chick. Those little furball chicks are so super cutie. I just want to hug it right up to my cheek like a warmy hamburger bun. But I realized I was only holding a picture in a library book. After a while, Jem and I decided we needed a break from reading, so we swept the dirt floor under our tree using our homemade brooms of dead pine branches taped to wooden sticks. Jem told me she was taking swimming lessons this summer. She asked if I wanted to register for them too. I told Jem I'd ask Mom to see what she thinks, although I remembered taking swimming lessons once. Didn't go very well. We had to dunk our heads 10 times. The swim teacher called them head bobs. But each time I went under and came back up, the teacher's hair was still dry. I asked her why she didn't do head bobs. When she didn't answer, I asked if it was because she only did head Freds. Teacher didn't think that was funny. So for my next head bob, I stayed under longer because I didn't want to see her again. In fact, I asked Mom if I could bring my snorkeler to the next swim lesson. Jem and I pretended our tree was an underwater coral reef and the pine cones were shells and crabs. We pretended to swim around like fish under our tree. Mom stopped by with a tray of sandwiches, some pretzels and orange slices for lunch. We pretended she was a pirate carrying treasure. Mom set the sandwiches down and smiled at us. She noticed we were pretending to swim and asked how the water was. Speaking of swimming, Jem, your mom says you're taking swimming lessons this summer. What a wonderfully important skill to learn, Mom commented. Jem replied, Thank you. We were hoping Oaken could take the same swim lessons as me. My mom would be willing to drive both ways. Thank you for the offer. I'm afraid we signed Oaken up for a nature camp that very same week. I spoke to your mom this morning about that. Perhaps next year, Mom said. I sat stunned for a moment. Mom left to go back to the house. I looked at Jim with a troubled expression on my face. Well, maybe we can take swimming lessons together next year, Jem said. No, it's not the swimming lessons I'm sad about. It's Camp Gidgeybakken, I replied. Jem didn't understand what I was talking about. I explained how Mom and I bumped into Mrs. Nadergater at the library. I explained how Mrs. Nadergater talked Mom into signing me up for Camp Gidgeybakken with her inside-only daughter, Poppy. I told Jem how Poppy only wanted to play indoors and camping is mostly outdoors. Jem and I sat down on the dirt bottom floor under the tree and started to eat our sandwiches. I noticed the sandwich tasted different than our usual PB&J. I peeked inside. Sure enough, no pickles, no jam, just bread with yellow and white chunks mashed together. I wondered what these sandwiches were. Jem said it looked and smelled like egg salad. Well, what kind of eggs are in an egg salad? I asked. Jem and I looked at each other horrified when we remembered the chicken book and seeing those sweet, wet, yellow, tiny chicks hatching out of those eggs. I immediately spit the egg salad out of my mouth because I did not want to be eating baby chicks. The thought of that made me want to cry. Why would Mom feed us baby chick salad? I wondered. Jem lost her appetite too when she noticed the sickening look on my face. Jem said she thought she heard her mom calling her home for lunch. She left her baby chick salad sandwich on the ground, said goodbye, hopped on Violetta, and rode home. The fact I was going to Camp Gidgeybakken with inside-only Poppy and that I almost ate baby chick salad made me feel rotten. Why did I have to go to the library? It was there. where we bumped into Mrs. Nadergator, and it was there that chicken book stared at me until I picked it. The problem was that it pecked me, balked at me, and now I'm going to camp with that Poppy. Chapter 3, Cooped Up. Before getting on the bus to Camp Gidgebacken, I read Mom the list of things I needed her to do while I was away at camp. Number 1, high five Graham. Number 2, take a walk with Grandpa. Number 3, feed Dad and let him leave his shoes wherever he wants. Number 4, read Millie the animal book and make the animal noises. Number 5, call Jem every day and ask about her swim lessons. She may want to borrow our snorkeler. Number 6, lastly, tease Robbie. The more, the better. Please tell everyone except Robbie that I'll miss them and that I might see them if I return alive from this 3-day camp with inside-only Poppy. Oh, I almost forgot. Please water the oak tree Mrs. Grover gave me. It's important to me, I added. Mom chuckled, pinched my cheeks, and told me I'd only be gone for 2 nights and 3 days. Then Mom hugged me and told me she knew I was going to have a blast, and she couldn't wait to hear all the nature camp adventures. I hugged her back because I was going to miss her too. The truth was, I liked the nature in my own backyard. I didn't tell Mom that because camp cost money, and Mom seemed excited for me. Poppy insisted I sit next to her on the bus. It didn't make sense. Poppy was excited to go to camp, but hated the outdoors. I wasn't excited to go to camp, but I loved the outdoors. I sat down next to Poppy because she kept patting the seat beside her. Also, I didn't know anyone else. Poppy began telling me everything she packed, which was mostly clothes. Poppy described every color and type of clothing in her suitcase. When she asked me what I packed, I just shrugged and told her I had no idea because Mom packed my bag. Besides, I knew Mom didn't pack the tree or Jem, so I didn't really care what was in there. When we arrived at Camp Gidgebacken, we unloaded our bags from the bus and stood in front of the head camp counselor. Before she split us into groups, she welcomed us to Camp Gidgebacken. She introduced the team counselors and told us each cabin would hold 4 girls and 1 team counselor. She explained there was a central restroom known as the outhouse for all of us cabins to use. My cabin group of girls was assigned to Counselor Henrietta. Henrietta reminded me of a gym teacher. She was so full of energy. She wore a whistle and a great big smile. Counselor Henrietta led the way to our cabin and asked if we'd like to choose camp names. If we didn't, she'd be happy to choose one for us. That's when I discovered the names of my 3 other cabin mates. Itchy was short with red curly hair. She had a rash on her skin, on all the bendy places on her body, like behind the knees, at the elbow bends, and under her armpits, which she proudly showed us. She told us she had eczema and had to apply lotion 3 times a day, hence the name Itchy. Lumpy was the other cabin mate. She was average height and thin like a walking stick bug. I couldn't see any lumps anywhere. Even her nose was small, and I wondered why she was called Lumpy. Counselor Henrietta must have wondered about her name, too. When she asked Lumpy why she chose that name, Itchy jumped up and spoke for her. Itchy and Lumpy came to camp together like Poppy and I did. Itchy said that Lumpy vomits when she eats anything that has lumps or bumps in it. Lumpy just looked down at the floor. Counselor Henrietta turned to me and read my name off the clipboard. She thought my original name was interesting, and when I told her what it stood for, she said she loved it and thought that I should keep it. Poppy demanded that she keep her own name too, and thought it was just silly to make up camp names. Poppy said aloud that it was foolish to come up with anything else but the name your parents gave you. Immediately, I inched over toward Itchy to let her know I hadn't wanted to come with Poppy to camp. I wanted everyone to know my mother was forced by her mother to sign me up, but I kept quiet and kept inching closer toward Itchy and Lumpy. Finally, I whispered to Itchy that I loved her name. I told her that my grandma gets eczema too, and she's really cool. In fact, I'm itching to get back home to her, I whispered with a wink. Good thing Mom packed my puddle jumpers, because it rained all the way to our cabin, and I needed those boots. We took a narrow single-file nature trail to get to our cabin, which I thought was really cool. I could have hiked all day in the rain, but the rest of the campers couldn't wait to see the cabin and get inside. Did these people forget that we were at nature camp? And nature is outside. The cabin was made of logs from real trees. It looked just like the Lincoln log houses Millie and I built at home. It had 2 windows, 5 sleeping mats on the ground, and a table with chairs around it. Henrietta told us to make ourselves comfortable and pick a sleeping mat to lay our sleeping bag on top of. The other girls were busy unpacking all their clothes and sleeping bags. The girls began talking about who sleeps where and who gets the window. Poppy, of course, made a fuss and got to set up her stuff right where she wanted to. The other girls moved as far away as possible from her. I sat with my loaded bag at the only spot left open and wished I was home with Jem under my pine tree in the pouring rain. Henrietta went over the camp rules and asked us questions to get to know us better. Henrietta took out a stack of board games and we played each one. The girls were getting frustrated with me because I wasn't paying attention, and I never knew when my turn to roll the dice was. I just kept staring out the window, wondering if we were ever going to see nature. I was thankful to be the first person to lose the game and be done. I just wanted to be alone. I decided to write home to Mom and tell her how mad I was. The truth was, I really missed her and home and wondered why she sent me here. My nature notebook was filled with paper made from real wood. I began to write Mom and Dad this letter. Dear Mom and Dad, why did we go to the library? Why did you have to bump into Mrs. Nadergator and her inside-only daughter, Poppy? I should have checked out 100 books from the library because all I'm going to do here for 3 whole days is stay inside and read. Besides, the chicken on the cover of the book I checked out keeps staring at me and mocking me. I feel like a chicken cooped up in this cabin. In fact, my cabin mates are picking on each other like bored hens. What's worse is that Poppy's the mother hen. I wonder if she's really a mean rooster with spurs. It's raining here and no one wants to go outside in nature, even though this is a nature camp. Our cabin smells funny. Do you want to know what it smells like, huh? Do you want to know? Our cabin smells like skunk butt. I could almost hear Mom gasp at that word. I knew I shouldn't have written that, but Mom shouldn't have sent me here. Also, Mom, mosquito bites are covering most of my body, and I gave up on wiggling around in an effort to keep them off me. Oh, and I gave up on repellent, too. I figured the mosquitoes might as well be having fun if I'm not. In fact, tonight, I'm going outside in my birthday suit under the moon to give those mosquitoes a real feast. P.S. Please send meatloaf, because I'm sick enough to die here, and I think meatloaf might just finish me off. I could feel the tears well up in my eye bottoms because I missed Dad, Millie, Ram, Gramps, Jem, and my pine tree. Heck, I even missed Robbie. But then madness came inside me again and I wrote some more. P.S.S. Also, I'm officially changing the name of this camp from Camp Gidgy Bakken to Camp Gidgy Rotten. Sincerely, your chicken-cooped, chicken-pecked, chicken-pooped daughter, who's dying of boredom, meatloaf, and mosquito bites. Oaken. I knew my letter to them sounded miserable and mad, but that's how I felt, and no good manners were popping up for me to write. Even if they did pop up, I was too mad to write them. Then I tore the letter out of my notebook, crumpled it in a ball, and put it way down at the bottom of my sleeping bag because I knew I couldn't send it. Chapter 4, Flying the Coop. The next morning, I waited for Counselor Henrietta to go to the outhouse. Then I unzipped my sleeping bag, flung it off me, ran to the cabin door, and flung it wide open. I walked over sleeping bodies of my cabin mates lying on the floor. I opened all the windows and I shouted, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" My cabin mates popped up to see what the racket was that woke them. They looked stunned, like I had just rolled their eyelids up like sleeping bags. "What are you doing, Oaken?" Itchy asked. "Come on, we gotta fly this coop," I said. We gotta get out of this stinky cabin. Who's with me? I asked. Itchy smiled, even though she just closed her eyes. Lumpy slowly zipped her bag up completely over her head, and Poppy folded her arms over her chest, pulled off her cucumber eye mask, and glared at me. She stormed off to the outhouse to tell Counselor Henrietta. When Poppy and Counselor Henrietta returned, I was sitting on the front steps of the cabin. I was all packed up, my sleeping bag and all. I wanted to go home. I sat there with my elbows on my knees and my hands on my cheeks. The rain was dripping off the front porch of our cabin. Counselor asked Poppy to go in the cabin, and then Henrietta sat next to me on the steps. Oaken, it's hard to be inside when all you want to do is be outside all day, Counselor Henrietta said, as if she knew exactly how I felt. I didn't say anything. I just sat watching an ant, trying to scramble and find its home, like it was lost in a jungle of sticks and leaves. At any moment, a drop of rain would be like a grenade. I felt just like that ant and wished we could shake hands. I'd shake his little ant hand and tell it I understood, and then we could be friends. I'd carry it around so its little legs wouldn't have to travel so far, and I'd promise her we'd find her little ant home and my home too. Counselor Henrietta asked if I'd like to take a nature hike with her. She handed me a walking stick and told me to keep up. I asked if I should bring all my stuff. She told me to leave it there for now. We would be back soon. We walked around the campgrounds and up to the wire fence just beyond the great hall where everyone raced in to eat their meals. I asked her what was behind that fence. Counselor Henrietta just stared out into the field, not hearing my question, and then told me she noticed I was reading a book about chickens. She asked if I liked chickens. I told her I didn't know much about them, except I almost ate baby chick salad once. I told her I was reading a library book about them because the chicken on the book cover wanted me to. Counselor Henrietta laughed and asked me why I came to camp. I told her the whole library story and how Poppy and I didn't play well together. Told her how I missed my tree, my family, and even my brother. I told her how I was even starting to miss meatloaf. She laughed again and asked, "Yeah, who invented that yuckiness?" She told me we were going to get along real well. She told me how she loved to be outside, and when she couldn't be outside in nature, she felt like a caged bird. She told me, however, that if she hadn't ever felt caged up, she wouldn't have known what nature's freedom feels like. She said learning what you don't like is as important as learning what you do like. She said joyful people are those people who have joy even when they're enduring something they don't like. There's that word again, I thought, endure. I thought about camp, Poppy, meatloaf, and that little lost ant. Counselor Henrietta reminded me of Gramps in that moment. Her blue eyes even matched his, and we were starting to match the color of the sky. Henrietta looked up and said, "Yes, the clouds are clearing." Henrietta promised the rain would stop it, and if it didn't, we would venture outside anyway. She told me today was my day, not Poppy's, Itchy's, or Lumpy's, mine. I wasn't quite sure I knew what that meant, but it sounded better than a stinky inside board cabin cooped up kind of day. She told me to keep that a secret, and if I started to be thankful for even the hard or the ugly things, then even the hard and ugly things would soon become a joy. Hey, that sounded a little like Jesus' brother James. Along the hike back to our cabin, Counselor Henrietta pointed out things like a huge spider web dripping with tiny droplets of water. It's amazing how strong that silk thread is, I thought. She and I rolled over some logs near our cabin to uncover some grub worms, centipedes, and a black salamander with yellow spots. When we returned to the cabin, Poppy was standing with her arms crossed. Her eyes were squinty and her lips were scrunched up tight like a drawstring bag. Counselor Henrietta thanked Poppy for keeping things under control while she and I were hiking. Poppy's drawstring tight lips eased into a slow, proud smile. I realized how powerful a simple thank you can be, strong enough to cut that drawstring into a smile. Counselor Henrietta shouted, "Rise and shine!" Then she added, "I like Oaken's wake-up call better. Oaken, rooster call, please." So I shouted as loud as I could, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" Itchy and Lumpy popped up for the second time. only this time their eyes were already open. Henrietta explained how today was going to be different. We were going to spend the entire day and night outside. She told us to grab our bug spray and apply sunscreen. She reminded Itchy to apply her eczema lotion and asked Lumpy if raspberries would make her vomit. Lumpy smiled and said that she loved raspberries. Wondered what kind of lumpy things did make her sick. Poppy was last to get ready. We were all standing at the door waiting for her to roll up her sleeping bag. She insisted on brushing her hair and folding her cucumber eye mask into a tiny little square. She didn't look happy about going outside. I decided to see if this thank you would work again. When she finished rolling up her sleeping bag, putting her sun hat on, and spraying herself with bug spray, I said, "Thank you, Poppy." She huffed and budged behind the counselor to be first in line. Itchy turned around and looked back at Lumpy, who looked back at me. I made a chicken rooster head with my hand on top of my head and silently stuck my tongue out as a waddle, and I waddled it at Poppy. I was trying to be grateful, but the chicken in me kept balking. I don't think this was the kind of joy Henrietta was talking about. Nobody saw that except Itchy and Lumpy, and they giggled with their hands over their mouths. Henrietta took us on a hike all around the campground trails. She explained we were going to visit 3 different natural habitats: the forest, the prairie, and the wetland. Like the song The Itsy Bitsy Spider, the sun came out and dried up all the rain. We picked wild raspberries and gathered fallen pine cones. We saw a huge oak tree, and Henrietta looked over her shoulder at me and winked. I wanted to wrap my arms around that oak tree and tell her how we were like tree sisters. The oak tree gave us lots of acorns. Itchy, Lumpy, and I were going to pick a pocketful of acorns to play Acorn Wars later. I thanked the oak tree for all the acorns. Henrietta was right. I was feeling joyful, despite the fact that Poppy kept asking if we could return to the cabin. Henrietta was real knowledgeable about nature and amazingly skillful at ignoring Poppy's relentless whining. Henrietta stopped in the middle of a walking bridge that went over a pond. Here she handed us dipping buckets so we could scoop up some pond water and have a look at pond life. She told us if we lay down on our bellies on the bridge, it'd be easier to scoop up the pond water. My scoopful of water was a great one. In my bucket were 2 bugs. They were swimming right on top of the water. I decided to name them Jesus and Peter. Henrietta said they were called water strider bugs. I had some duckweed in my bucket, too. Itchy scooped up a tadpole. Lumpy couldn't see anything in her bucket, but she did have a checkered winged dragonfly on her head. We told her to be real still. Then we all admired its wings and helicopter body. Poor Lumpy didn't even get to see it, so I told her I'd draw a picture of it for her back at the cabin. I told her she was special because out of all the natural places to land, she chose her. Poppy was too busy trying to wipe away dirt on her shirt to even look into her bucket, which I noticed didn't have any water in it anyway. Henrietta pointed to a turtle sunning itself on the log. The sun was shining brightly. We sat on the bridge peering into our buckets and listening to the red-winged blackbirds calling from the tall reeds. They were calling back to each other. We emptied our pond water back into the pond and gave our buckets to Henrietta. Then we headed into the shady area. The temperature felt cool in there. Henrietta told us about the tunnel of trees that was shading us. I breathed in real deeply because I knew trees gave us oxygen, and being right underneath their branches seemed like the place for the purest oxygen on the planet Earth. Yesterday, camp was awful. Getting settled in, the rain, playing all those board games all evening. Today, camp was as it should be, outside. We spent most of the day exploring different habitat areas. Although Poppy complained about yucky pond water, dirt on her shirt, pesky mosquitoes, bitter-tasting raspberries, and how bored she was, it didn't stop me from smiling. Maybe Camp Gidgee Bakken wasn't so bad after all. Tonight's agenda? Bonfire. Hooray! Chapter 5, Campfire Stories. The flames were higher than my head as I sat on a tree stump around the campfire. Henrietta kept stoking the fire with more logs until we had the biggest campfire out of all the cabins. She brought hot dogs, buns, marshmallows, chocolate bars, and graham crackers. We each had to find a stick if we wanted to roast food on the fire. I was back in a flash with my stick. Poppy did not want to go in the woods for fear of poison ivy, so it took her the longest. Luckily, we saved a hot dog and a s'more for her. Itchy kept cracking jokes, most of which didn't make sense, but were funny because she kept making armpit farty noises after each one of them. I asked her if that bothered her eczema. Itchy said surprisingly it made it feel better. I asked her if she was sure that wasn't the laughter. Laughter always makes everything feel better. Then she taught me how to do an armpit farty noise too. Henrietta began singing a song and asked us to repeat her in our loudest voices. We sang, and to our surprise, the other cabins sang back to us. It was real cool. Suddenly, we were in a cabin sing-off. Other cabins sang back too. When the last song ended, some camper yelled, "One more time!" That was followed up by a counselor shouting, "No way, Jose!" In the end, Henrietta said we were the loudest. As we gazed into the fire, Henrietta asked if anyone knew a ghost story. I shouted, "I do! I do!" And they all listened to the ghost story I was about to tell. One dark and scary night, Itchy began making a wind noise, and I smiled and nodded at her perfect sound effect. I continued with more. The moon was hidden behind eerie wisps of clouds that looked like giant spreading spider webs. At exactly 12 o'clock midnight, there was a rustling in the forest, and the moon poked its head out from the spidery webbed clouds. The rustling noises were coming from those woods. Over there, I pointed. I could see two frightening shadows in the distance. I squinted to get a better glimpse, and that's when I saw them. I saw two of them. Two long-haired dolls with bodies walking on their shoulders in the dirt, under the leaves and moss. They walked strangely toward us without any legs or arms, just their shoulders. They had ruby red lips and their faces were full of makeup. They opened their mouths and said, "Oaken, I like my dolls with hair, and that's a horrible, horrible story," Poppy shouted. She stood up and began to cry. Then she stormed off to the cabin. Everyone watched Poppy dart into the cabin and heard the screen door shut. "Oaken, how does it end? What do the dolls say?" Itchy questioned. I sat slumped on my log, staring into the fire. Those dolls seem like the perfect scary story. I hadn't meant to hurt Poppy, but I knew I did. After a few moments of silence, Henrietta stood up and said we had better go back to the cabin. I said, wait, I'll go back. I'll talk to Poppy. It wasn't nice of me to tell that story. Henrietta agreed to let me go to the cabin to talk to Poppy. When I entered the cabin, Poppy sat on her sleeping bag. I could tell she was crying under her eye mask. I sat next to her, and she inched away from me. I wondered if she knew it was me. I told her I was sorry about all the things I said, about her hairy dolls being creepy. I told her if she told a creepy story about my tree, I would have been mad too. After a while, I asked Poppy why she came to camp if she didn't like being outside or in nature. Poppy pulled up her eye mask and blew her nose into a tissue. Wow, she even packed tissue, I thought. She told me her mom signed her up for 3 camps every summer and thought the fresh air at nature camp would be healthy for her. I sat next to Poppy, and even though she inched away from me, I felt closer to her. I felt sad for her. I told her 3 camps seemed like a lot. I told her how I could barely make it through one camp that lasted 2 nights, and the truth was that I'd rather be at home under my tree. I apologized again, only this time with much more sorrow in my heart because I could feel her hurt. I apologized for calling her a mean rooster, too, even though she didn't know I had called her that in my letter to Mom. I was wrong. She was actually one of those chickens who other chickens pecked. Pecked because it was too small, too oddly feathered, too weak, or too something. I said a little prayer asking Jesus to help me to hug her, even though I thought she wouldn't like that. Instantly, I reached over and hugged her quickly and then let go and headed to the door. I jumped when Henrietta and the rest of the campers came into the cabin. Henrietta asked us in a whisper if we wanted to pull a prank on our neighboring cabin. Everyone was so excited, except Poppy. Poppy blew her nose in a loud honking noise and expressed how certain she was that it was against camp rules. Henrietta promised Poppy it would be a great memory from camp. Then she gave Poppy the list of rules and asked Poppy if she would double check all the rules and make sure it was not on the list. Meanwhile, the rest of us discussed the plan. We would sneak over to their cabin after they put out their fire. We would have to be very quiet. No armpit farting allowed. We would have to be very careful in the dark. We would hold on to the camper's shirt in front of us as we'd sneak through the narrow trail to their cabin before they got there. Henrietta gave us the line order. Yippee! I got to be right behind Henrietta. Thank you, I whispered excitedly. Itchy would be second in line, followed by Lumpy and then Poppy. When Poppy heard this, she refused to go. Henrietta told Poppy she'd miss her and wish she'd come, but if she insisted on staying back in the cabin by herself alone, Henrietta would not stop her. Poppy quickly agreed to come, but was still certain it was against camp rules. Besides, Poppy had come with us as this was our last camp night before going home. Wow, the thought of that seems sad to me now. I had a great day at camp. Henrietta nudged me and asked if I was ready. She said she thought they'd be putting out their fire any minute. And just then, we heard the water splash and the fire puffed and hissed and cracked and went dim. We quickly tiptoed through the woods. Poppy kept questioning all the sounds around her. Finally, Itchy and Lumpy looked back at her at the same time and said, "Shh." We crept in a single file line further along the trail until we were almost to the cabin. We had to enter the cabin in a hurry because those campers were going to be getting back from the outhouse any minute. Henrietta mentioned that each camp counselor took her campers to the restroom after campfire before heading back to their cabin. We were glad, as it bought us just enough time to quickly walk the trail, enter the cabin, and crouch down inside. We waited for them to return. When we heard the snapping of twigs on the trail near the cabin and the counselor talking, we hushed. The plan was to wait until they got inside, then we'd all jump out and yell, "Boo!" We heard them at the door and saw the light of the flashlight under the cabin door. When the door flung open and the girls were all inside, we jumped up and yelled, "Boo!" so loudly even the nocturnal critters jumped. Those girls jumped up and made funny, frightened faces. One almost started to cry. Henrietta turned on her battery-operated lanterns so they could see all of us, and finally they began to giggle. Yep, we got 'em all right. That was fun. We stayed a while and played games. Poppy found a friend who brought 2 small dolls. They each had one to play with. That was the first time at camp that I saw Poppy smile. These campers were fun too and had a great sense of humor. It was late and Henrietta said we needed to get back. As we headed back to our cabin, we talked all about the big scare and how funny they looked when they entered the cabin. We even scared the camp counselor, who immediately warned she'd get us back for that scare. We were laughing and remembering how quietly we snuck inside, and soon we were at our own cabin door. We entered our quiet cabin, and guess what? Boo! Wow! Another group had done the same thing, scared the socks right off us, just as we had done to that group. They crept up to our cabin and scared the bejeebers out of us. I screamed and jumped up and grabbed the first person I could. When everyone started laughing, I loosened my grip hi, Poppy, I said. Sorry I grabbed hold of you so tightly. Poppy looked disgusted and turned with a huff. It was not easy being friends with her. I was beginning to understand what Grandpa meant when he told me about sandpaper friends. At times, she seemed to want to be friends, and at other times she looked at me like I was meatloaf. Henrietta turned off the lantern, and we zipped up into our sleeping bags. I just laid there listening to all the night sounds and wondered what all the nocturnal animals were up to tonight. I imagined myself a pine marten who had climbed to the top of my pine tree, and I was looking up at the stars. I thanked God for such a wonderful day and night of adventure and fun. I counted my blessings like they were stars. Finally, I fell asleep. Chapter 6. Henrietta. In the morning, Henrietta woke me up quietly before all the other campers woke up. She whispered she wanted to show me something. She also whispered to Poppy that she and a substitute counselor were in charge for a little while, and the two of us got dressed quietly and headed out of the cabin door. She reminded me about yesterday and how we went on a hike just beyond the great hall, where we stopped by a wire fence. It was by the fence where she asked me if I liked chickens. We were at the wire fence again, only this time there were hundreds of chickens on the other side. They were so beautiful. They were all different colors. Some had long feathers, some were shorter feathers. Big chickens, little chickens. Henrietta pointed them all out by name and type. She showed me the roosters and the difference between them and the hens. She knew all about chickens. I thought to myself, did she write that chicken book I was reading? Henrietta told me she grew up raising chickens, and the farm just beyond that fence was her father's farm. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a bag of cracked corn. She asked if I'd like to feed him. Henrietta and I climbed over the fence toward the chickens and dropped the cracked corn right by our feet. I could see their combs and their feather patterns, their funny feet, eyes, and beaks. They tilted their heads to look at me and even pecked at my shoe. They were very curious about us. Henrietta reached down to hold one and brought it close to her chest. She told me this one was a Sicilian buttercup named Gertie. It was called Buttercup because it had a double comb shaped like a cup on top of her head. It was her favorite. She said Gertie often would fly on top of her head to perch. She asked if I wanted to hold her. I did so badly want to hold her, but I didn't know how. So Henrietta showed me. She cautioned me that chickens like to peck anything new, shiny, and different, and that I needed to be careful of its beak. Then she pulled up some dandelion leaves and fed them to Gertie while I was holding her. Gertie made all kinds of interesting sounds like gurgle, murgle, bawk, cluckety. She felt warm and soft in my arms. I could feel her little chicken heartbeat, and her chicken feet tickled my arms. I gently set her back down in the grass for her to free range. Free range means the same things as chicken exploring. I could understand why chickens liked exploring. So do I. Henrietta said we needed to get back to the cabin. I thanked her for showing me all those chickens. She looked at me and asked, "You really do love nature, don't you?" She smiled at me and told me that I would make an excellent camp counselor someday. I liked the sound of that. Before climbing back over the fence, I waved goodbye to the chickens. Henrietta reached down into the grass and handed me the most beautiful egg I had ever seen. It was dark brown like milk chocolate with little black and brown specks on it. She told me that a well summer chicken laid that egg. This was one of the greatest treasures I had ever held. Henrietta described many different chicken eggs. She taught me the difference between the bleached ones in a grocery store and the farm eggs. I giggled to myself about how I had wasted Mom's grocery store egg salad sandwich that day under the tree with Jem. Henrietta laughed when she remembered a time when she was little. She hid all the chicken eggs she could find under her bed in an attempt to save them all from being eaten. However, the eggs were not fertilized, and they all rotted instead and stunk up her whole house. Henrietta asked whether or not I wanted to keep the egg. I really did want to keep it, but I learned from my grandpa that the best place for nature's living things is nature itself. Henrietta told me we could carry it back to the cabin to show the rest of the girls, and then she'd give it to her dad because it was an unfertilized field egg. I carried the egg so gently as not to break it back to our cabin. Inside, the girls were still sleeping. Henrietta said thank you to the substitute counselor and to Poppy. Then she offered me another book about chickens. She had it in her backpack and told me I could read or look at the pictures until the girls woke up. Henrietta offered to keep the egg safe on the table in a small basket while I read. Itchy woke up at the sound of someone knocking on our cabin door. Then I saw a pink sheet of paper slide under the door. Henrietta got up to read it, and by now Poppy and Lumpy were up too. They asked what it was all about. Henrietta explained how this was our last morning at camp. It was a letter reminding everyone to pack up all their belongings they came with before going to the dining hall for breakfast. The buses were being loaded right after breakfast, and we needed to bring all of our belongings with us. Henrietta shook her head and said, "It always goes by so quickly. Just when we're starting to have fun, it's time to go." I agreed with her. At first, I wanted to go home so badly, but by the end of the second day, I really was enjoying nature camp. Poppy, Itchy, Lumpy, and I began rolling up our sleeping bags. Then Henrietta had a great idea. She wanted to show all the girls our extraordinary secret, just beyond the fence. The girls did not understand where we were going, but agreed it would be fun to go there in our PJs before breakfast. Henrietta asked if I would lead the way along the path. Poppy said she had way too much stuff to pack up and told us to go on ahead, that she would stay back. But Henrietta insisted we all go. Poppy rolled her eyes, folded her arms, and huffed into line. Lumpy backed up when Poppy squeezed behind her, and Itchy. This time, because Henrietta was at the back of the line, she saw Poppy budge and told Poppy she needed to take her rightful spot at the end of the line. Poppy rolled her eyes again, and I wondered how many times a person had to roll their eyes before they got stuck up there in their eye socket. We excitedly walked the trail in our PJs to Henrietta's father's farmyard of chickens, and when the girls reached the wire fence and saw all those beautiful chickens, they gasped, pointed, and begged to hold them. Henrietta went over a few ground rules about the nature of chickens. She cautioned them to be careful where they stepped due to chicken poop and chicken eggs in the tall grass. Itchy was itching to get over that fence. She was nearly already over it before Henrietta finished talking about the rules. Lumpy asked Poppy if she was going to climb the fence to see and hold the chickens. Poppy huffed and stated that chickens were filthy, disgusting, unintelligent animals, and then added, I wouldn't hold one of those birds even if someone gave me $1,000,000. I carried a friendly chicken over to Lumpy, who was reluctantly waiting at the fence. Come on, Lumpy. They're so soft and amazing. Look at their feet. Aren't they funny? Lumpy giggled, touching its soft feathers, and Poppy plugged her nose. I set the chicken down and held out my hand to show Lumpy the beautiful chicken egg I'd found in the grass. It was a greenish colored one, different than the one we brought back to the cabin. Lumpy was in awe, and she held out her hand to hold it. She was careful not to drop it. I told her that's what baby chicks come out of. Henrietta's dad owns roosters, too, and this was her dad's chicken farm. Poppy's ears perked up at that mention of a baby chick hatching from an egg, and she peered over Lumpy's shoulder for a closer look. Lumpy thanked me for showing her, and I gave the green egg to Henrietta. Henrietta called to us that it was time to go. We needed to head back to the cabin, get packed up, bring our belongings to the bus, and eat breakfast. Itchy did not want to let her chicken down. She was holding what Henrietta called a big buff, colored Orpington chicken. Jokingly, Itchy asked if she could bring it home. Henrietta laughed and told Itchy she could name the chicken after her, and if she came back to camp next year, she could look for her and hold her again. Itchy gently set the Orpington chicken down in the grass, and she, Henrietta, and I climbed back over the fence and met up with Poppy and Lumpy. We stopped at the outhouse on the way back to our cabin so we could go to the bathroom and wash our hands before breakfast. I agreed to show Itchy and Lumpy my chicken book on the way home on the bus. Poppy complained the whole way back to the cabin because her slippers were dirty from the trail and full of wood chips. Chapter 7. Headed Home. At breakfast, we were introduced to Henrietta's dad, Buck, whose chickens provided all the eggs for our breakfast. It was a real feast. One camper immediately jumped up and protested, Ew! I'm not eating a baby chick. Buck just giggled and told us that these eggs were unfertilized eggs, so there weren't any chicks growing in them. Only fertilized eggs grow into chickens. Unfertilized eggs are sold at grocery stores. He told us it was perfectly healthy and safe to eat these eggs. He asked us to bow our heads, and he thanked God for this breakfast, for us, his family, and his farm. He thanked God for children who appreciated nature and wanted to learn more about it. He finished his prayer with an amen. There were many choices of eggs, scrambled, sunny side up, omelets, and even hard-boiled. I wanted to try each one, but didn't think that would be good manners. I chose the one that was smiling at me, sunny side up. Wow, it was delicious. Henrietta sat beside all of us and said she likes to dip her toast in the yolk part and eat it that way. I gave it a try too. After breakfast, when everyone was lining up to get on the bus, I ran back to the dining hall, and I tugged on Buck's shirt. When he turned around toward me, I thanked him for taking good care of chickens. I thanked him for sharing his chicken eggs with us. Lastly, I thanked him for Henrietta, because I really liked that camp counselor. He tilted his head to the side and he chuckled. He took off his cowboy hat, put his hands on his knees so that was eye to eye with me, and he said, "From one nature lover to another, you're welcome, Oaken." Then he winked at me, and I ran back to catch my bus. Henrietta was standing by the doors to our bus, and so I gladly let Itchy, Lumpy, and Poppy go ahead of me. I really wanted to invite her to my tree someday, but I knew she had to teach camp and help her dad farm those chickens. It was my turn to get on the bus. I paused for a moment, and Henrietta lifted my chin and she said, "You and me sure had a lot of fun, didn't we?" I nodded because I could feel a lump in my throat and wondered if I should have been the one nicknamed Lumpy. I thought my eyeballs might start to cry. That's when Henrietta gave me the biggest hug ever. That hug lifted me right off the ground. Then that funny Henrietta, she cocked her head back and she yelled, "Cock-a-doodle-doo," and whispered in my ear, "I won't forget you." And I thanked her and I hugged her back. Some other kids were pushing behind me and telling me to hurry up. Camp and Poppy had taught me a lot about being patient, so I politely asked those budgers to endure. Then I climbed aboard the bus. Poppy was already on the bus, staring out the bus window as if she didn't want to be near anyone. But I knew if I didn't sit with her, someone else would have to sit with her. That person might complain about how they didn't want to sit by her, and then I'd feel bad for Poppy all over again. So I sat down next to her, and she inched closer to the window. She drew an imaginary line on the bus seat and told me not to cross it. I couldn't figure out what to do. I already apologized for the doll stories. I saved us some more for her. I let her budge me all the time, and I even hugged her. So I simply told her I was sorry she did not have fun at camp, and I was sorry again for telling the campfire story about her dolls. I knew she heard my apology, but she didn't say anything in return. I thought to myself, "Yep, Poppy's a sandpaper friend, all right. Her roughness causes grrr inside people. I don't want to have grrr in me. I want to be more kind. Hey, I am becoming softer." That thought made me smile. I took out my chicken book and began paging through it. Itchy and Lumpy were sitting in the seat across the aisle from me, so we passed the book back and forth. I showed them the picture of all the different colored chicken eggs. There were big ones, small ones, brown ones, and bluish ones, just like Henrietta showed us at camp. Poppy turned her head to get a look without wanting me to know she was interested too. Itchy wanted to see the page, so I passed it over to her and Lumpy. The next page showed a little chick hatching from an egg. Poppy became really squirmy in her seat and demanded she see the picture of that filthy little chicken hatching from that egg. When Itchy passed it back to me, I handed the book to Poppy, but she refused to hold it. Instead, she put both hands in the corner of her seat closest to the window. I told her the picture of the baby chick looked wet and weak at first. I bet after a nap they perk up and become so fluffy and cute that all you want to do is hug it. Poppy kept her hands and her head in the corner. I could not figure her out. Did she want to see it or not? Was she interested in chickens or did she think they were filthy? I did not like that she kept calling them filthy animals, so I just tried to ignore her. Itchy, Lumpy, and I sang camp songs, told jokes and stories about camp, and exchanged telephone numbers. Itchy told us she had Henrietta's camp address so we could write to her, and offered to share it with us if we wanted her address too. Poppy piped up and said, "I'm certain Oaken already knows her telephone number, her address, her favorite color, her favorite animal, and of course who her favorite camper was." I looked at Poppy kind of puzzled, and I thought, well, gee, I don't have any of that information, but I wish I did. Itchy started doing farty noises, and I finally remembered to ask Lumpy if she really does vomit from things that are lumpy. Funny thing was, that story wasn't at all like I thought. Lumpy told me when she's around new people and new things, she feels like she can't talk. It's like there's a big rock in her throat. I asked her why Itchy told us she vomited from things that are bumpy and lumpy, and she said Itchy knows how uncomfortable she gets, and so that's always what she tells people. And then they stopped talking to me. I told her I understood that feeling. I get rocks that feel like lumps in my throat too, like lava rocks, but I always erupt and then they come out. I also told her she's a real good talker. Lumpy smiled and she said thanks. Chapter 8. Home. When the bus came to a stop and the doors opened, I thought surely it was to let out a bee or a fly because it seemed too early to be home already. The bus driver stood up to tell us to be seated until all bags were unloaded from the trailer. A few men who looked like dads started unloading bags and setting them on the sidewalk in front of the library doors. When all the bags were unloaded, campers began filing out of the bus. As I walked to the front of the bus, I saw Mom and Millie waving at me with big smiles on their faces. I couldn't wait to hug them. I missed them. I stepped off the last stair to the bus and jumped to Mom and Millie. They hugged me so tightly. Afterward, Millie kept clapping and clapping. Mom was holding my bag for me. I took it from her so the three of us could all hold hands walk into the car. I could hear Poppy complaining to her mom for making her carry her own bag. Mrs. Nadergater loudly asked Poppy why she wasn't using her hands to help carry anything. Poppy stomped off ahead of her mother, walking awkwardly to her car. Mom shrugged her shoulders and said, "Let's go home." Oaken, I surely missed you. I'm so proud of you. All the way home, I told Mom and Millie about my nature adventures. Some of the adventures weren't even about nature, like scaring the socks off the other campers, and then they in turn scaring the socks off us. I told Mom about the natural habitats we visited, like the forest, the prairie, and the wetlands. I told her my favorite habitat was Buck's chicken farm. Mom asked who Buck was. I explained to Mom it was Counselor Henrietta's dad. The whole way home, I didn't stop talking about Henrietta and how cool she was. Mom said Henrietta sounded exciting, like the most memorable person. I think Millie agreed too because she hadn't even dozed off in her car seat yet. Millie kept looking at me and clapping her hands and saying, "Okie, Okie, Okie home." I nuzzled noses with Millie and said, "Thanks, Millie, for being so excited to see me. I missed you, Mill." Everything is okie dokie now that Okie's home. I was eager to call Jem and get to the tree, but Mom insisted I unpack and put my dirty clothes in the hamper, my sleeping bag in the closet, and my suitcase in the garage. Just then, Robbie came in the door, grabbed the milk carton, and was going to take a drink right from the carton, but Mom caught him. She gave him a look that said, "Oh, no, you don't. Please get a glass." Robbie acknowledged me by saying, "Hey, where have you been, Weasel?" Excitedly, I began telling him about Camp Gidgebakken, but he walked past me, gave me a nuggie on the head. He said over his shoulder, "That's great. Camp called and said they need you back right away." I tried to slug him as he walked past me, but I missed, and Dad pretended I slugged him instead. "How did the big, strong oak tree fare at nature camp?" Dad asked cheerfully. I told Dad about the acorn wars that Itchy Lumpy and I had. I told him how I got to keep my name because it was so naturey and original. Dad hugged me and told me he knew I'd be the life of the forest. He told me it wasn't the same without me around this place. He whispered, "Thanks," in my ear for telling Mom he could leave his shoes anywhere he wanted. Teasing, Mom, Dad said loudly, "It's thoughtful when family members can step into your shoes for a day." Mom smiled and replied, "Yes, it is. In fact, Millie is wearing your shoes right now and is headed for the stairs." Dad's eyes got big and his lips made the letter O at me. He turned and bumped into Mom. Mom smiled and said, "Gotcha," to Dad. Yep, it was good to be home, I thought. I love the smell of Dad, coffee, and newspaper. Coffee and newspaper on their own don't smell memorable, but when you put 'em together with Dad, it smells like fun day. Dad asked if I had been to the tree yet. Mom overheard and reminded Dad I was working on putting away my camping gear first and hinted for Dad to put away his work shoes. Dad told me I looked at least 2 feet taller and 10 times as brave. Mom started the bath water for me and I jumped in the tub. I scrub-a-dub-dubbed until I was as clean as I was going to get. I put on my clean play clothes, called Jem on the telephone. Jem kept asking me all sorts of questions. Finally, I excitedly told her to meet me at the tree so we could catch up on everything we missed together. I shouted to Mom and Dad I was going to the tree to meet Jem and ran out the door. I brought my tree key and ducked under her branches. I hugged her trunk and told her how much I missed her. I told her how I'd dream about her at night and how we would count the stars together after I climbed high up in her branches. I quickly watered her and swept the needles off the dirt floor beneath her branches. I could hear Jem's bike bell. I ran out from under the tree and met her in the alley. I hugged her as her bike was still moving slowly to a stop. Jem started to wobble, wiggle, and giggle, and we wound up in a heap in the middle of the alley. I missed you so much, Jem, I said. I missed you too, Oak, Jem replied. I loved Jem. She was like being in pajamas all day. So comfy, easy, and warm. Chapter 9, Poppy's Surprise. I told Jem all about Henrietta, my camp counselor, the chickens at Camp Gidgeybakken, and about the eggs they laid. Jem and I pretended to be baby chicks hatching, peeping and clucking under our tree. We used our feet to scratch for things to eat. I showed her how to dust bathe. Dust bathing is what chickens do to rid their bodies, their feathers of bugs. They fluff dirt up into their feathers by lying in the dirt. We pretended to lie in the dirt like chickens. I was surprised to see someone popped up right by the tree where we were playing. Poppy, what are you doing here? I questioned. Well, your mom and my mom are having coffee, so I thought I'd visit you too. Is this the tree you're always talking about? I told Poppy this was, indeed, the best place in the world. Jem waved at Poppy, and so I introduced Poppy to Jem. Poppy stared at the dirt we were bathing in as chickens. Jem, of course, invited Poppy under the tree, and Poppy carefully and slowly ducked underneath the tree. I wasn't sure why she was here. She had never been interested in my tree before, or being outside. Poppy seemed different. She stared down at her fancy Barbie purse she was holding with both hands. It was awkwardly quiet until I asked her what she carried in their purse. She stood still for a minute, then slowly and gently pulled out a wad of something all wrapped up. Then she uncovered something that made me gasp on account of I knew exactly what it was and where it came from. Poppy was holding a bluish egg. It was a chicken egg from Camp Gidgeybakken. I had lots of questions for her about that egg, but Poppy spoke first. She told me she needed my help. Her voice sounded nervous-like, and she spoke faster. She told me she took it because she wanted something to care for, wanted something to love. She had hoped that the baby chick would love her in return. Poppy refused to look up at me. She was hiding the egg on the bus on the way back from camp. Another noise came out of my mouth again. Not intentionally, it just erupted, so I quickly covered my mouth with both hands. But when Poppy looked up at me, there were tears in her eye bottoms. I could tell she was afraid and worried about the baby chick inside the egg. She wondered how it would live without its mother to care for it. I saw a tear roll down her cheek and fall into the dirt. Jem reached to comfort Poppy, but Poppy stepped back abruptly. Please don't touch the egg. Please, it's so fragile. If something happens to it, it'll all be my fault. All my fault. Oaken, I don't know anything about how to care for it. And you know all about nature. And you've read chicken books. Oaken, please help me. I know now that I shouldn't have taken it from its mom. I'm no chicken and I don't know what to do. I have to go. My mom is leaving soon. Poppy wrapped the egg gently and returned it to her purse. Poppy's mom called for her to come. She quickly dried her eyes and looked at me with so much sadness. I wanted to hug her. However, I knew she would not want me to do that. Besides, I could accidentally break that egg. So I told her this very big blurt. I'll help you, Poppy. It'll be okay. Poppy ducked out of the tree, whispered not to tell anyone, and walked toward her mom waiting for her in the car. They drove down the alley. Poppy looked at me with sad eyes through the car window. For the first time ever, I had a problem with nature. The nature of a secret, that is. Secrets are kept hidden, but that kind of nature didn't feel right inside. Chapter 10, Expert Advice. Oaken, it's Sunday. I don't think the library opens till noon, and besides, we have church first. What time is it anyway? Mom whispered after I woke her. It's 6 a.m. Mom, please tell me when we can go to the library afterward, please. Oaken, go back to bed before your sister wakes up, and we'll talk about it at breakfast, Mom replied with her eyes closed. I returned to bed. Lying there, I thought about the pickle I was in. I knew Poppy was counting on me, and more importantly, the baby chick was counting on me. I did not want to let them down. I had to find a way to help. I knew I couldn't sit on the egg like a mother hen does. I'd surely break it. I knew two experts on this subject, God and the librarian. Yes, two very reliable sources who were available to help. I waited for my guppy alarm clock to wave its fin and sound the alarm. It finally did at 8 a.m. I popped out of bed, dressed, brushed my teeth, and headed for the breakfast table. I needed to find out more about baby chicks and how they hatch. We drove to church. Mom agreed to take me to the library afterward. She inquired why it was so urgent. I knew I would tell Mom soon, but for now, I told her it was a special project. That was the name for things I wasn't quite ready to share yet. Once I learned how to hatch a baby chick, then I would share it with the world. At church, I couldn't stop thinking about the chick grown inside the egg. Was it missing its mama already? I asked God all the questions instead of keeping them in my head. I prayed, Dear God, first, how do you think of these amazing nature things? Like real chicken hatching from an egg? How does it fit in there? It seems real science-like. Hey, speaking of science, some people say science is your enemy, but I know science is your friend. Grandpa and I both know it's true, because you keep showing us how you and science get along, like chickens hatching from eggs. Sorry, God, back to the pickle in me. I know you know this, but Poppy took a chicken egg because she wanted a friend. If I could help, and you know it's hard for me, by being a friend to her, she might see how you operate. God, you love even those furthest from you, even when they don't want anything to do with you. You are some friend. We both know you're the greatest friend of all. But God, how do I help her hatch a chicken? If you have any ideas, please send them to me. In the meantime, I'm going to research more at the library. Thank you. I love you. Amen. I opened my eyes and looked down at my skin because I was afraid God might turn me into a mother hen. But my skin didn't have feathers growing on it. Phew! I smiled because God must have known I'd miss being me. I whispered one more thank you to him. After church, our family went to the library. I walked right toward the librarian for help. Excuse me, Mrs. Librarian. If I had a problem and needed to fix it, am I in the right place? Well, that depends on the problem, replied the librarian. If you're looking for books, then you are in the perfect place. Well, let's say I wanted books about how something gets out of somewhere without a mama hen's help. I mean, without any help. Is there a book about some kind of hatching machine or egg cracker? Oh, I see. I see indeed. You are looking for a book about incubation. I think we have a book about an incubator too, replied the librarian. Yes, that sounds real smart. Books about that incu-thingamajiggy, I added. The librarian speedily wrote down what she called chicken scratch, and with a wink she asked me to follow her. She pulled two books off the shelf and told me these might help solve my problem. The first book showed a chicken page after page that sat on eggs until they hatched. The book's title was Incredible Incubation. The second book showed a machine that really did hatch eggs. I sat right there and browsed the pictures and read all the words I could read. Perhaps I could build this machine. I think Jem, Poppy, and I could do it. I stood up to thank the librarian, but she must have left because the only person standing over me was Robbie, telling me it was time to go. I could hear Millie crying and knew I had better check out and go. Besides, I needed to get home. I wanted to talk to Jem and Poppy about plans to build this inky egg hatcher. Chapter 11, Hatching a Plan. This was going to be tricky. When I got home, I quickly called Jem and asked her to meet me at the tree. I gathered up my books and made a quick sandwich. Before I left, Mom told me Poppy was planning on coming over again today. I looked at Mom and said, Okay, well, I better be going to the tree now. Mom asked if everything was okay. I assured her it was, but there was no time to talk. As I approached the tree, I noticed Mrs. Grover. She was hanging clothes on the clothesline. She greeted me and asked what was new. Mrs. Grover had a way of looking at me that seemed like she could see right through to the pickle in me. I explained how a girl named Poppy had taken something from nature that didn't belong to her, and now I was trying to help her solve a problem. Mrs. Grover listened with her heart. Her eyes always shone with light and love. She paused a moment, put her hand on her hip, and added how amazing God's grand design for nature truly is. Then added how difficult it would be to try and copy it. She knew Poppy had stolen the egg. I realized I had just told Mrs. Grover the secret Poppy asked me not to. I was feeling badly, and so I just nodded my head and said goodbye to Mrs. Grover. I ran to the tree, but quickly turned around because, well, good manners entered my brain. Mrs. Grover, I can help you hang those clothes. Mrs. Grover looked at me and said, Oaken, it seems you are in a pickle, and pickles need time to cure. I know you're going to come up with a solution that's real honest and smart, but thanks for the offer to help. Mrs. Grover returned to her work, and I returned to the tree. The library books were helpful, but I'm not sure I had the tools to build an incubator, nor did I have a hen to sit on the egg. A powerful storm of ideas in the brain is called a brainstorm. I learned that from my teacher in second grade. Let the brainstorming begin. I began writing my thoughts and questions about chickens and eggs. Number 1. Hens are female chickens. Hens lay eggs. Hens sit on the eggs to keep them warm. I wondered what I could use for a mother hen that would keep the egg warm. Would a stuffed animal work? I had lots of stuffed animals. My favorite stuffed animal named Chester Holland Pfister, the egret, might work, although he was a boy. Ivory Iversonia Tusk could sit on the egg. She's my stuffed elephant with the ivory tusks from Africa. Even though she didn't have feathers, her fur was soft and warm. Oh, but Ivory was an elephant, and elephants don't lay eggs. Also, if the baby chick knew an elephant was sitting on her, she may never want to come out. I could glue real feathers on her in an effort to disguise her to look like a real chicken. Number 2. How will the chick eat and drink? I already know the answer. Henrietta told me the egg doesn't need food or water because it has everything the growing baby needs right inside that egg. Wow, that was another one of God's brilliant ideas. No food and water. Number 3. Did the chick need anything from her mom besides warmth? I asked out loud as I wrote. Jem shouted, Yep, it sure does. Jem had frightened me. I hadn't heard her or the bite bell approaching the tree. She just popped up under the tree. She asked if I was researching a plan and noticed the new books I had with me. She, too, had researched hatching a baby chick on the computer with her dad. She found out 2 very important facts that she was in a hurry to tell me about. I told Jem to go first. Jem discovered chicken eggs hatch in 21 days. Baby chicks in the egg need a constant temperature of 99.5 degrees. They need a constant humidity level of 50%. Jem was talking so fast and frantically, my brain nuggets couldn't even keep up with her. I asked her to slow down. Then I asked what constant meant. Jem explained constant meant the same at all times and over time, as in 21 days. Without me asking, she told me what humidity was. Humidity was the measure of moisture in the air. These 2 things were really very important needs to a chicken egg. Without warmth and humidity, the baby chick inside the egg could die. She told me 2 ways to incubate the egg. The first was to find a broody hen to sit on the egg, and the second was to use an incubator. Broody? I asked curiously. Jem explained a broody hen was a female chicken who wants to sit on eggs all day long. In fact, she barely wants to get up to do anything except eat and drink. Jem told me broody hens can raise any type of chicken, even ones that don't belong to them. All you have to do was put the fertilized egg underneath her, and she would sit on it, and when it hatched, she would care for it like it was her very own. Jem's eyes looked big and beautiful, as real gemstones, all sparkly with excitement. Wow, Jem was a real fact finder. I was suddenly feeling reluctant to share my ideas with Jem. I was feeling really embarrassed about my silly idea to have Ivory Iversonia Tusk try to hatch a real live chicken egg. How would Ivory keep the temperature at 99.5? Also, where and how would I get humidity? Ivory wasn't even real. I cannot believe I thought this silly plan might work. Although I kept these ideas private in my head and notebook, Jem could sense I was feeling foolish. She told me she didn't know any of these things about chickens before she began researching. She told me how she looked those words, those big words up on the computer. I felt overwhelmed. Why had I agreed to help Poppy hatch a chicken? Hatching a chicken suddenly seemed too complicated. I thought of Mrs. Grover. I knew Mrs. Grover was right. God's plan for nature is a grand design, and it would be difficult to copy. A baby chick needed its mom. I felt like I had more of a giant cucumber than a pickle of a problem. I would definitely need to tell Poppy the truth and return the egg to Henrietta. Besides, secrets grow uncomfortable. They're just not meant to be kept inside of you. Just like baby chicks, they grow, and before long, they need to hatch out of the egg. Chapter 12. Chicks. I knew Poppy would be here soon, and so when Mom shouted for me to come out from the tree and come home, I wasn't surprised. I ran up the alley to the driveway and saw a truck parked there. I asked God for strength to encourage Poppy to tell the truth and return the egg. I ran in the door and stopped abruptly when I saw Henrietta. I stood frozen like an iceberg. I could not move. Mom replied, "Oaken, isn't this a wonderful surprise? She came all this way from camp to see you. She had some extremely important business to discuss with you." I swallowed hard, thinking she knew about the stolen egg. I thought about Lumpy and how she gets lumps in her throat. Suddenly I could feel a giant-sized lava rock lump in my throat, and my lumpiness erupted. "It wasn't me! I didn't do it! She didn't mean to steal it, really! I was trying to help her, but then I realized God's creatures belong to Him, and we shouldn't try to copy His creation by trying to hatch our own plan. And I was gonna tell Poppy. She should tell you, but Poppy looked—" Henrietta interrupted me, and I finally caught my breath. "Oaken, I'm confused. I came here to first ask permission from your parents and then ask you if you'd be willing to incubate these baby chicks for me and my father using this incubator I have here." Henrietta took out the most amazing incubator machine. The machine was real, not a picture in a library book, not a stuffed egret or elephant, but a real, genuine incubator. It held a dozen or more eggs of all different colors, and I was frozen for the second time in less than 5 minutes. I didn't realize I was holding my breath. After the air left my body, I felt tired, sad, dishonest, and confused, and the tears came next. I cried. Mom was confused and asked me what was going on. She tried to apologize to Henrietta for the things she knew nothing about. I was confused too. I felt so honored and yet guilty for being dishonest. I felt sad I hadn't been courageous immediately. I felt like I didn't deserve such an honorary visit. Why would Henrietta choose me to raise these chicks? After all, I hadn't told Poppy to return the egg. I felt little and weak and even foolish for thinking of ways to hatch a baby chick on my own. Besides, God's plan always turns out best. After the lava spilled out over everything, Henrietta told Mom she thought she understood what might have happened. Henrietta sat down next to me and asked me if I had something to tell her. I quickly nodded and wiped my nose on my sleeve. I told her everything, including my silly plan to have Ivory Iversonia Tusk sit on the egg and how I nearly glued real feathers to her butt. Henrietta hugged me and told me she once tried to hatch a rock she thought was an egg. That made me smile. Then she asked if I knew where Poppy had taken the egg. She asked if she took the egg from the clutch under a hen or an egg she found in the field. I told her I didn't know, nor did I know how or when she took it. I just knew that she had it and was worried she couldn't care for it. I apologized again and asked her to forgive me because that's what God wanted me to do. Oaken, that takes a lot of courage to confess something you feel so wrongly about. Thank you for being courageous and sorry. These are the very serious reasons I trust you with this clutch of eggs and incubator. Are you up for the job? I know you're going to be just the right person to hatch and care for them. I believe God knows that about you too. I was so full of joy in that moment, I leapt into Henrietta's arms and told her she had the greatest natural name of all. She laughed and said, "Oaken, you are eggs extraordinarily special." Does that mean yes? Oh, yes, yes, of course I can do this job. I'm a really fast learner and I'll do my very best. I won't let you down, I promise. Henrietta mentioned she'd be by to check up on things occasionally. Before Henrietta began to show me all about the incubator, I ran to the tree to grab Jem so she could learn and help me. I grabbed Jem's hand and dragged her by the hand, running and giggling up the alley into my house. Close your eyes, Jem, close them, I said. Okay, open them, I said to Jem. Henrietta showed both of us about the amazing incubator machine. She told us to call with questions, and if it was too stressful, she could come sooner and take over and help out in any way she could. I knew it wasn't going to be stressful. It was going to be joyful. And Jem knew it too. We listened to everything Henrietta told us. She even left notes for us to use to help us. Well, I think that about covers it. Henrietta stood up to leave. She thanked my mom, Jem, and me, and turned to open the door. But then she remembered one more thing. Oaken, one more very important thing. We are all God's children. We should care for one another and care for what He gave us. Please ask your friend Poppy to help take care of these chicks too. I promised her I would, and I told her Poppy would really like that. Henrietta knew that. She also knew Poppy had likely taken an unfertilized field egg because the campers weren't even in the barn near the nesting boxes. Sensing the relief in me, Henrietta said she planned to stop at Poppy's house before returning to camp. I watched Henrietta walk toward her truck from the window. I was just about to wave to her, but I noticed Poppy and her mom pulled up in their car alongside Henrietta. That's perfect timing, I thought to myself. I knew Henrietta would talk to Poppy right there in the driveway. I left the window and returned to Jem, Mom, and Millie staring in the incubator full of God's creation set up right on our kitchen table. And I whispered this prayer to God. Dear God, you are a mystery too. I like that about you. Grandpa says we're not supposed to know everything. That's your job. I think it's perfect knowing everything is your job because you know what? Nope, not chicken butt. You're the king. That's what. We need you running this show. You knew I needed Poppy, didn't you? God, I think people who are like sandpaper on the outside are hurt people in the inside. You knew a sandpaper friend like Poppy would teach me about patience, endurance, kindness, because I didn't have those skills. See how you do that, God? Thank you for letting me be a part of your super smart ideas. Thank you, God, for all of life, baby chickens, rainy cooped up days, Poppy, and even mosquitoes who don't want to be friends. Everything, God. Thank you for everything. I love you first and most, and that's no yoke. Ha ha, I mean joke. Amen. Philippians 4:4. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Epilogue. That spring, Jem, Poppy, and I hatched all 12 chicks in that incubator with a little help from Henrietta. They were so cute. Every day, the three of us held, fed, watered, sang, and played with those chicks. Taking care of baby chicks gave us a reason for Poppy to enjoy being outdoors. In fact, she was outside more than she was inside. Poppy seemed happy, and I thanked God for that. The chicks would follow us around like little children. We named them all. The chicks quickly outgrew the cardboard box we kept them in, so Grandpa and I began sanding a second-hand chicken coop that we bought from a farmer down south. Grandpa handed me a piece of sandpaper, told me to go with the grain of the wood. I smiled at Grandpa and told him I understood what he meant. You mean endure, Grandpa. You were right. I'm a lot smoother for it. Yep, that's what sandpaper friends will do to you. We smiled at each other and kept right on sanding. The end.